Have you ever wondered why the most powerful kings in Europe were terrified of a group of mountain farmers? Imagine a wall of steel points moving toward you at a full run. You are on a massive war horse. You wear the best armor money can buy. But it doesn't matter. The men in front of you aren't blinking. They aren't shouting. They are just marching. This was the reality of facing the Swiss Pikemen. For hundreds of years, these men were the undisputed masters of the battlefield. They didn't have guns. They didn't have horses. They only had a long wooden stick and a level of discipline that seemed superhuman. The story of the Swiss is not just about war. It is about how a small group of people turned their entire culture into a weapon. They lived in the harsh, cold Alps. Life was hard, and the mountains were dangerous. This environment created a specific kind of warrior. These men didn't fight for glory like knights did. They fought to survive. In this video, we are going to look deep into their world. We will explore the secret training that turned young boys into cold-blooded soldiers. We will see how they broke the power of the heavy cavalry forever.
Most people think the Swiss won because they were lucky or because they had long spears. That is a mistake. Their true power was in their minds and their bond with each other. If you stay with me until the end of this video, I will reveal the one specific training rule that was so strict it required a soldier to kill his own best friend if he took a single step backward. You will see why no army in the world could break their spirit for over 200 years. Let's look at how the mountain meat grinder was actually built. To understand the Swiss soldier, you have to look at the land where he lived. The Alps are beautiful, but they are deadly. In the Middle Ages, Switzerland was a place of steep cliffs, deep snow, and narrow paths. There was very little flat land for farming. If you wanted to survive, you had to be tough. You had to be fast. Most importantly, you had to work with your neighbors. In the mountains, a man alone is a dead man. If an avalanche happens or a bridge breaks, you need your village to help you. This created a mountain fortress mindset. Every village became a tiny army. The Swiss did not have a king to protect them. They only had each other. This made them very different from the rest of Europe. In other countries, knights were the stars. They wore fancy armor and rode horses. The poor peasants just followed them and usually ran away when the fighting got scary. But in the Swiss mountains, there were no knights. There were only free peasants who owned their own land. They took great pride in this freedom. They knew that if a foreign duke or emperor conquered their valley, they would lose everything. This meant they didn't just fight for money, they fought for their homes. This geography also taught them how to fight. You cannot charge a heavy horse up a steep, rocky mountain. The Swiss learned to use the land as a shield. They would wait high up on the ridges. They would watch their enemies struggle through the mud and the rocks below. Then they would strike like a rock slide. They didn't use complicated plans. They just used gravity and raw power. This was the start of their reputation. They weren't just soldiers. They were a force of nature that lived among the clouds. The big turning point happened at a place called Morgarten. A powerful army of Austrian knights tried to enter the Swiss lands. The knights thought it would be an easy victory. They saw the Swiss as simple farmers. But the Swiss trapped them in a narrow pass between a mountain and a lake. They threw huge rocks and tree trunks down on the knights. Then they rushed down with simple woodsman axes. It was a massacre. The world was shocked. A group of peasants had destroyed the best noblemen in Europe. The Swiss realized that if they stayed together, they were unbeatable. Training to be a Swiss pikeman didn't start in a military camp. It started in the cradle. In Swiss villages, physical fitness was a part of life. Boys played games that were actually secret military drills. They wrestled in the dirt to build core strength. They ran up steep hills to build lungs that never grew tired. By the time a boy was a teenager, his legs were like tree trunks. He didn't see the pike as a burden. He saw it as a part of his body. Every man in the village had to own weapons and armor. It was the law. If you weren't fit, you were shaming your family.
The pike itself was a terrifying tool. It was a wooden pole topped with a steel head, stretching up to 18 feet long. If you hold a long stick at one end, it feels very heavy. Now imagine trying to run with it while thousands of other men are doing the same. The Swiss spent hours every day just learning how to walk together. This sounds simple, but it is very hard. If one man trips, the whole row falls. They practiced until they could move as one single giant machine. They used drums to keep a steady beat. This drum beat became the sound of death for their enemies. But the most brutal part of their training was psychological. Most soldiers in history were afraid of horses. A charging horse is a one-ton wall of muscle and bone. Naturally, a human wants to run away. The Swiss trained to kill that instinct. They stood in tight blocks and practiced holding their ground while horses rode directly at them. They learned to trust the man to their left and the man to their right. They knew that as long as the pike stayed level, the horse could not touch them. They turned themselves into a human forest of needles.
They also practiced the rush. Most armies of that time moved slowly and carefully. The Swiss did the opposite. They trained to sprint in full formation. Imagine hundreds of men, perfectly lined up, running at you at top speed. It looked like a solid wall of wood and steel coming at you like a freight train. There was no time to shoot at them. There was no time to think. One moment the Swiss were far away, and the next they were pushing their pikes through your chest. This speed was only possible because of years of painful daily practice. The Swiss didn't just fight in a line, they fought in a massive square called a Gewalthaufen. This was a thick block of hundreds or even thousands of men. Think of it like a giant angry hedgehog made of steel. The first few rows of men held their pikes straight forward. The rows behind them held their pikes at different angles over the shoulders of the men in front. This created a roof of spears. If an arrow or a bolt was fired at them, it would often hit the wooden poles before it could hit a person. There was no weak spot to hit.
This formation was divided into three main parts. First was the vanguard. These were the bravest and fastest men who hit the enemy first to break their spirit. Then came the main force, which was the largest group. Their job was to crush everything in their path like a giant steamroller. Finally, there was the rear guard. These men watched the back and the sides. This meant you could not sneak up on a Swiss square. No matter which direction you attacked from, you were met with a wall of sharp points. They could turn their entire formation in seconds without breaking rank. One of the most terrifying things about the Swiss was their no-quarter policy. In most medieval wars, rich knights were captured and held for money. It was a business. But the Swiss didn't care about ransoms. They didn't take prisoners. If you fought the Swiss, you either won or you died. This made them incredibly scary to fight. When the Swiss drums started beating, enemies knew there would be no mercy. This wasn't just being mean, it was a tactic. It meant the enemy was often too scared to stand their ground. They would turn and run before the pikes even touched them. Inside the square, the pressure was intense. The men were packed so tightly that they could feel each other's breath. If the man in front of you died, you didn't stop. You stepped over him and took his place immediately. There was no room for fear because there was no room to move. You were locked into a machine of meat and wood. Because they moved so fast and hit so hard, battles were often over in minutes. They didn't get into long, drawn-out fights. They simply ran over the enemy, trampled them, and kept moving toward the next target. Soon, the rest of Europe realized they couldn't beat the Swiss, so they decided to hire them instead. Switzerland became the soldier factory of the continent. Kings from France, Italy, and Spain would send bags of gold to the Swiss Cantons to buy their service. This turned war into a massive business for the mountain people. Being a mercenary was the best job a young Swiss man could have. It was a way to see the world and bring wealth back to his small village. But even though they were fighting for money,
They never lost their iron discipline. The Swiss were famous for being loyal, but only if you paid them on time. They had a famous saying, "No money, no Swiss." If a king ran out of gold, the Swiss would simply turn around and march home, even in the middle of a war. But as long as the gold flowed, they were the most reliable soldiers in the world. They didn't care about politics or crowns. They only cared about their contract and their unit. This reputation for extreme loyalty is why the Pope in Rome chose them to be his personal bodyguards. Even today, you can still see the Swiss Guard at the Vatican. But life inside these mercenary units was governed by terrifying laws. The Swiss knew that their power came from the group, not the individual. Because of this, they had blood laws. If a soldier showed cowardice or tried to run away during a battle, he wasn't just arrested. The men closest to him, his own friends and neighbors, were ordered to kill him on the spot. They believed that one coward could ruin the whole square and get everyone killed. This sounds cruel, but it meant that every man in the formation knew his friends would never leave him.
This system made the Swiss the elite special forces of the 1400s and 1500s. They weren't just soldiers, they were professional killers who followed a strict code. When a city heard that the Swiss were coming, they would often surrender immediately just to avoid the slaughter. The Swiss pikemen had reached the top of the world. They had gone from poor mountain farmers to the most expensive and respected warriors in history. They had more power than many kings, all because they refused to break their formation. But no empire lasts forever. In the early 1500s, the world of warfare began to change. A new invention was appearing on the battlefield: gunpowder. At the Battle of Pavia, the Swiss faced a nightmare they couldn't run over. Spanish soldiers used early guns called arquebuses. They hid behind walls and ditches where the Swiss pikes couldn't reach them. For the first time, the Swiss were being shot down from a distance. Their bravery and discipline didn't matter against a lead bullet. The meat grinder was finally slowing down. As guns became faster and more accurate, the pike became less useful. A man with a gun could be trained in weeks, while a Swiss pikeman took a lifetime to perfect. The massive squares that once protected the Swiss now made them easy targets. Huge cannons could tear holes through dozens of men with a single shot. The age of the knight had ended because of the pike, and now the age of the pike was ending because of the bullet. By the mid-1500s, the Swiss began to move away from the front lines of every battle. However, their legacy did not disappear. The Swiss changed how every army in the world works. They proved that a disciplined group of common people could defeat elite warriors. Every modern army that marches in step or uses a clear chain of command is following the Swiss example. They taught the world that success isn't about the flashiest gear or the richest leaders. It is about the bond between the people standing next to each other. They turned teamwork into a science and discipline into a shield. Even though they don't fight with 18-foot sticks anymore, the Swiss spirit remains. Switzerland became famous for its neutrality, but that neutrality is protected by a very strong military. They are still a nation of citizens who are ready to defend their mountains at a moment's notice. The image of the pikemen remains a symbol of ultimate toughness. They were the men who proved that if you are disciplined enough, you can stand against the world and win. So, what was that one rule that made the Swiss the most disciplined army in history? It was the law of the square. Earlier, I told you that a soldier had to kill his best friend if he retreated. It sounds impossible, but it was a cold reality. If a man took even one step backward during a charge, the man directly behind him was legally required to run him through with a pike. If he didn't, the whole row was executed. To the Swiss, a single coward was a hole in the armor. They didn't see it as murder. They saw it as survival. This extreme discipline is why the Swiss pikemen were never truly conquered on a level playing field. They didn't lose because they were weak. They only stepped aside when technology made their way of life impossible. They lived by a simple code: stand together or die alone.
It is a lesson that military leaders still study today. The image of the Swiss peasant holding a long wooden stick against a king's army is a reminder that human will is often the most powerful weapon on any battlefield. If you are amazed by the grit of these mountain warriors, there is a lot more to discover about how they shaped our world. From the secret bunkers still hidden in the Alps today to the elite guards that still protect the Pope, the story of Switzerland is full of surprises. Could you have survived a single day in a Swiss pike square? Let me know in the comments what you think about their no-quarter rule. If you enjoyed this deep dive into military history, make sure to hit the subscribe button and turn on notifications. We have many more stories about the warriors who changed history coming your way. Thanks for watching until the very end.